you can't suddenly have a couple of meetings with the Jewish community, make a few apologies, and expect a deep-rooted problem to disappear. They say a fish rots first from the head. And he's the head of an organisation and a person who's been deeply involved and associated with people and organisations that are, unethical to Israel and the Jews generally. And I think you can't suddenly disassociate yourself from these relationships.
When you use the phrase deep-rooted problem, there's a slight danger that we divide along two lines here. Is it people who are absolutely convinced that there is a deep-rooted problem and people who are absolutely convinced that there isn't, and never the twain shall meet? I kind of sit between both of those positions and ask you to describe or to provide evidence of his particular personal deep-rooted problem with these issues.
Okay. So there's two things that I would draw attention to. The meetings he's had in the Commons with individuals who have said some outrageous thing about Jews, and I can't remember the fellow's name, that had suggested that Jews had used, the old blood libel of using blood from children to be used. I mean,
you put us in a slightly invidious position by not being able to remember his name, and I think if it's the one that I've heard referred to in the past, Jeremy Corbyn has professed a degree of ignorance about the man's full back catalogue, which I think is probably fair, isn't it? I mean, do you check the last 30 years of pronouncements of everybody you meet with?
I think that as a leader of an opposition...
But he's not, though, is he? He was an obscure backbencher when he did the thing you describe.
But he no longer is. He has a responsibility.
Yeah, so has he done it while being leader?
No, I think that the mural, for example, which he dismissed. You see, there's the problem. It's to do with the intelligence of someone who may be prime minister.
I think the mural was profoundly anti-Semitic, and I think Jeremy Corbyn is far from the most intelligent member of Parliament. But you did say deep-rooted problem, and I did say evidence, and you did say a bloke whose name I can't remember who said some awful things and had a meeting with him long before he became leader. That's where people go, that doesn't sound like a deep-rooted problem to me.
Okay, so my
try again, maybe.
Would be this. My issue would be this: when Hitler wrote Mein Kampf in prison in 1923.
Yeah, we don't really think we can blame Jeremy Corbyn for that.
No. What I'm saying is that these were his associations, which you can go back years, suggest the predisposition towards a way of thinking. That way of thinking hasn't necessarily disappeared.
So you're reading his mind now.
No, I'm reading that he comes from a position which has, I think, a rather hostile attitude towards Israel. Israel is obviously a Jewish...
Hostility towards Israel is not quite the same as anti-Semitism.
No,
that's kind of one of the key points. And I'm going to keep pulling you back to that phrase, deep-rooted problem, because so far you've cited a bloke whose name you can't remember who met with him before he was leader, and you've mentioned Mein Kampf.
Okay, let me put it this way.
Okay. Third time lucky, Trevor.
Okay, last opportunity then. So he has, since he's come on board as leader, headed an organisation whose members have felt much more comfortable in making anti-Semitic statements in public and on social media.
Yes.
The fact that he is leader...
That seems reasonable.
And the fact that he's leader of an organisation and his members feel that they are comfortable under his leadership to make these rather insulting and degrading and derogatory comments suggests to me that they feel comfortable that he shares.
Yes, there we go. Now we've got something. I don't know that that's evidence.
Very disturbing.
I find that disturbing as well, and I think that is the problem he has to address, the boil he has to lance. It's not evidence of a deep-rooted problem. It's evidence of his followers perhaps having deep-rooted problems, not him.
This hasn't just been
No, but you can point at things he hasn't done and say that the fact that people feel comfortable doing them under his name or under his leadership speaks of a problem. I'm not going to dispute that. Others may. So how does he fix that? How can he...
Well, let me ask you a question then.
No, that's not how it works. How does he deal with people who think that he represents something he claims, indeed insists, he doesn't represent? Because you and I would hate to be held responsible for the views of people we disagree with. If I said, here's someone claiming to speak for Trevor in Finchley, and they said something vile, and I said, Trevor in Finchley, how are you going to deal with this? Because they speak for you. How are you going to deal with that?
Okay, I think that when people are called to account for statements they've made or written on social media that get into the public space and are vehemently anti-Semitic and have been insulting, and the the case in point where these MPs have cited, who had this debate in Parliament last week, one after the other.
It was incredibly powerful, and we covered it at the time, but it was pointed out to me afterwards that Twitter is full of people claiming to be things that they are not, and the burden of proof when making these accusations should actually lie with the victim of the abuse. You can't really prove that sticking hashtag JC4PM on the end of a tweet is evidence that, A, that person is actually a Jeremy Corbyn supporter, and I don't think you'd even begin to try to argue that it's evidence that Jeremy Corbyn somehow agrees with the sentiments expressed in the tweet. So the question then becomes, and this it seems to me is the heart of the issue, how does Jeremy Corbyn take responsibility for things he's not responsible for? Because that's what you're asking him to do.
No, but he's responsible for the conduct of those that hide under the.
No, he's not, though, is he? He's not responsible. Go on.
No, but under the umbrella of standing for Labour or being a Labour supporter and being more importantly a member of the Labour Party, if these people are found,
but you don't know that they're members of the Labour Party. The people who sent those tweets. See, everything you cite as evidence of the deep-rooted problem is quite easy to portray as not being a deep-rooted problem at all.
There are people standing at the local elections, councillors who have made rather unfortunate comments, hostile comments, which have been called to account. These people should be dismissed from the Labour Party, not allowed to stand under that banner.
Well, he would argue that they are being, but that the process is quite lengthy and rightly, it's complicated. People have the right to a fair hearing, and the burden of proof again lies with the accusers on this occasion. So everything you've said is
accelerated. You can't.
Right. So there we go. So we're not talking about the people who send anonymous tweets. We're not talking about the people who post stuff and somehow seem to think that they've been enabled or facilitated by Jeremy Corbyn's position. We're not talking about any of the abuse visited upon MPs, because unless there's proof of where it came from, you can't conclude that it's come from either Labour Party supporters or Jeremy Corbyn fans. We're talking about the established cases of people being brought to account for saying things you consider to be vile being investigated, and your answer to what he can do is hurry up.
Well, there has to, as a leader, there is.
I'm going to ask for a yes or no. That is your answer. It's taken us a long time to get there, but what you're saying now is they've identified the problem. A lot of the stuff I offered up as evidence of a personal, deep-rooted problem has turned out not to be.
I don't accept that proposition.
Okay, so prove to me that these tweets came from Labour Party members.
No, I can't prove that.
Right, so they've turned out not to be evidence of personal, deep-rooted problems, and the solution for you is you'd like to see him doing more and doing it more quickly.
No, I just find it. Listen. Just in terms of even if Jeremy can never, I do believe that Jeremy is against racism. I do believe he is against anti-Semitism as a notion. I do believe that genuinely.
But you need to see him doing more and more quickly.
As the leader of a party which has tremendous support, that is capable in the next election of becoming our Prime Minister and the ruling party, he is under a moral responsibility to ensure that party represents a moral dimension of being able to have.
Yes, but we can dance around this as much as you want. What we're concluding is the investigations into acts that have already been identified and are already underway need to be speeded up, to which their answer would be systemic. And Ken Livingstone is a very good example. The disciplinary action against him, many people have said, should be quicker. Corbyn says it will be resolved by the end of July. And I don't know that is necessarily evidence of a deep-rooted problem.